while we kind of lead up into that, if for those of you who might have seen me around in previous webinars or anything like that, my name's Jason. I'm a member of Cloverleaf's customer experience team. So you may have interacted with me via the support channel, which, if so, nice to see y'all again. And joining us to discuss further about or further into the Clifton Strengths assessments, we have Heidi and Melanie. And I didn't choose who gets to speak first, so I will choose you all at random and go with Melanie to kick off introductions.
Yes, thank you. Well, so good afternoon, everyone. We certainly appreciate you setting aside time today. We look forward to chatting about Clifton Strengths. As Jason mentioned, I am a senior enterprise customer success manager here at Cloverleaf, and I work with our enterprise customers that are rolling Cloverleaf out inside of their organizations. And I am also joined by Heidi today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Heidi Latire. I am a customer success manager here at Cloverleaf. My main role is to support our coaches and consultants. So, those of you who have our coaches and consultants may know who I am. Those of you who aren't probably don't know. So, nice to see some faces that may not know me. Very nice to meet you. And those that do, good to see you again. We've been doing some of these webinars. We've tried to do these assessment webinars for each one of our assessments that we offer. I think this is the last one we've got. So we have recordings of all of our past webinars if you did miss them. And so those are out in the help docs. I think we're kind of slowly getting them into help docs. That we do have recordings of any of those as well. So if you're missing the recordings or are interested in the recordings of past webinars that we've had on other assessments that we offer, just holler at us and we can send you that link to those past recordings. But yes, we get the questions a lot of, I'd love to get more information on the assessments that you offer. How can we do that? So we tried to get a webinar on each one. And like I said, this is our last one. So we'll be sending a survey out at the end of this as well. Love to get your feedback on what you thought of the webinar, any other future topics you'd like us to cover as well. We do a webinar each month that's different topics. This is kind of just that one more outlier of our webinar of our assessment series, but Jason normally runs those with Stephanie Licata. And so we're kind of like guest hosting this one as we insert this one here. But yes, if you have any questions or have, like we said, we'll be sending that survey at the end. We'd love your feedback on how this went, and any future ones you'd like to see as well. Awesome. All righty. Can everybody see my screen? Jason, you all got that? Awesome. All right. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about Clifton Strengths today. We're going to be going through, I think I like it. We're going to talk about the history of Clifton Strengths, just a little background. Some of you may have heard of it as Strengths Finders. Why is it called Clifton Strengths all of a sudden? Or what's the difference? And we'll talk a little bit about that. Understanding what Clifton Strengths are, what's the difference between Clifton Strengths and maybe some other strength-based assessments that we offer or in general. Why should we focus on strengths and not weaknesses? And just using Clifton Strengths on Cloverleaf's system in general. And then we'll leave time for some questions and answers. And like I said, we'll be presenting that survey at the end as well. Awesome. Jason, any questions we have in the chat yet? All righty.
No, all good. Sorry, I was trying to find my mute button.
You're fine. Awesome. So the history of Clifton Strengths. So about 40, they said 4 decades. So my sense, that's 40 years, right? So 40 years ago, Don Clifton started asking the questions, what would happen if we studied what people did right instead of what we're always trying to improve ourselves, right? So whenever, a lot of times when we think of how do we get better, we think of what we're not good at. He was trying to flip that switch and being able to think about, well, what are we really good at? What do we do right? And how can we make that better? So in that discovery, he led thousands and thousands of interviews with his team. Obviously, he didn't do all of those. He had a team of folks that did that with him. And they pinpointed a lot of persistent thoughts and feelings and behaviors, and then categorize those into a list of what they considered strengths. And there was a myriad of those, as you can imagine. There's hundreds of those. When they did all of that and they started to put some validity and some reliability behind those thoughts and feelings in those interviews. In 1999, they developed what was called Strengths Finders. That's when that was released. And that's what we've probably most have heard of today is Strengths Finders. So why is it now all of a sudden called Clifton Strengths? Well, it was funny. I actually learned something too as I was doing the research for this. It was actually called Clifton Strengths back as early as 2003, which is funny because I've obviously started taking this assessment after that, and it was called Strength Finders then too, but they did actually change the name to Clifton Strengths after Don's death in 2003. So it has been called Clifton Strengths for a while. If you've noticed, we've actually shifted our name from Strength Finders to Clifton Strengths to make sure we have the right verbiage as well, as we now have a partnership with Gallup and want to make sure that we're partnered correctly with our partners. So that is a little bit of history of where we came from and how Clifton Strengths has been created. So what are Clifton Strengths? It's a little blurry image. Didn't realize how blurry that would be when I blow it up. So a little bit of a difference here between, when you think of strengths, what is that? We have different assessments on the platform, like via character strengths, the character strengths. It's something that, more of a human skill, right? Or maybe we called them soft skills back in the day. What Clifton Strengths thinks of is what is a talent, and their definition of a talent is a natural way or feeling or behaving of something. That's what those list of all those things that they came up with. And when they take that talent, when we invest time into that and really make it something that we want to hone in, that becomes our strength. So that is Gallup's definition of what a strength is. And like I said, when they think of a talent, they think of it as a natural reoccurring pattern of a thought, behavior, or feeling that gets applied all automatically and productively throughout your life. So something for me as an example, something that's just like a natural talent of mine, I just really love working with people. I've always liked when people like me. And so that's just sort of embedded in the way that I've been. Maybe it's an only child thing. I kind of grew up as an only child. I have an older sister, but she's like 15 years older than me. So there's a big age difference. So I grew up as like the little kid that I wanted everyone to like me, right? So that natural talent to just want people to like me developed into the strength that I have of woo, winning others over. So I was kind of just born into this world to have this talent of wanting people to like me and winning them over to be my friend. And because I fostered that and worked on it even more throughout my life, and now some of you may have known, if you've ever met me and had a conversation with me, my coaches and consultants probably wouldn't be surprised to know that is a top strength of mine. And because I've fostered it and I have really worked on that strength without even realizing it, I think a lot of times, but it's something that I use every day now in my career. So to me, that is a top strength, and that's how that is developed. So why should we focus on strengths and not weaknesses? As you may see, I have my optimism shirt today on, and for me personally, I have just seen such a change in not only myself, but my colleagues, those that I've led in the past as well. When we lead with what people are good at instead of what are we struggling with, we see an improvement in productivity. When Gallup did some studying on just doing their surveys. Obviously, it's Gallup, right? That's what they do mainly is surveys. They surveyed a group of a couple hundred sales folks, and found out that when people use their strengths every day, they developed a 7.8 greater productivity percentage just by utilizing their strengths instead of worrying about their weaknesses. They also Teams actually created a greater profitability of 8.9%. So just they were able to actually put numbers behind if they focused on strengths versus weaknesses. So in the chat, I'd love to know just how many of you have practiced this, and feel free to share some of your own personal stories of if you've had that happen in your organization, and where you've seen that difference. Obviously, I for myself is, I see that every day in what we do at Cloverleaf. We're always focusing on our strengths. Even our with our annual reviews, is we don't really call them that, but what typically would be called annual reviews, we don't focus on what could we improve. It's what are we doing a good job at, and what do we want to continue doing? Like, please don't ever stop doing this because you're really good at this and we want you to continue doing that. Or what's something that's like, you know what? You're just not, we can tell you don't really like enjoy this, and we don't need you to do that anymore. Somebody else can pick that up. That's the approach that we take to our annual reviews, because we want to focus on those strengths and on the good things that we see and developed in each other at Cloverleaf here. Awesome. So I see some focus on areas of growth, but it really means skills gaps. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yes, you have to leverage your strengths to manage your challenges. 100%. I've also found too that when I have a challenge, it's a great way to shift from, oh, it's something that I'm just never going to be good at. Well, instead of focusing on something that I'm never good at, what am I good at? And how can I shift that focus from, I am never going to be really good at, for me, my past life, I was an accountant. And for those of you who know me are like, how was she an accountant? I was, because I did a very great job of maneuvering through great relationship building. I wasn't really great at always finding the detail problems or verifying things. Something I'm not naturally wired to do is verify, which as an accountant, that's something huge. So the way I went around that was I had great relationships with folks around me that were really good at that. And I would kind of do that, like, hey, I'll do something good for you if you do something good for me. And we played that role. I played into their strengths of someone that was really good at verifying, enjoyed doing that, where I enjoyed doing something that maybe was on their list that they didn't enjoy doing. So it was just a different focus on the challenges that I saw in my everyday life.
And I'll add on to that, to speak some truth to what Heidi was saying about what we do here at Cloverleaf. Um, I was more of a customer success specialist at the beginning of this year, and always found myself naturally gravitating towards solving problems, being um, a collaborator in that space, education, things like that, all the things that you lump into what I'm now doing in customer support. And through our great leadership that we have here, it was recognized that maybe I might thrive a little bit more being in customer support. So they really leaned into those strengths that through my Cloverleaf profile and just them getting to know me in the time that I've been here has helped me smooth over into this new role and really kind of thrive in it. So we really do practice what we preach here.
And we love seeing Jason in this new role too, because I'm not wired the way Jason is. So a lot of times I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start. And I'm like, hey, Jason, can you help me with this? And he's like, oh yeah, no problem. I'm like, oh, thank goodness. So it's so refreshing. It takes the stress off. I think that's why you do see greater productivity, greater profitability, because when you're leaning into your strengths and the things that you're naturally wired to do, and the things that don't take so much physical exertion to get accomplished, um, of course you're going to do better at your job. Of course your team is going to work better together, because you're all going into what you're naturally wired to do well instead of going against the grain. So the other thing I'll mention too, for those of you who are, reading book nerds like myself, I also have read The Happiness Advantage. That is a great a resource as well. They did a study on using just the perception of thinking of positive thoughts instead of negative thoughts and going that direction. So if just the thought of like strength-based assessments just intrigues you, I would highly recommend that book to read. So Happiness Advantage, I'll have to put the title of it and the author in the chat as well. But yeah, they talked about it was a Harvard study that he was a Harvard student and just saw the sadness on everyone's faces. It's kind of changed the way the perception was by just thinking of something positive at the end of the day. And so all of this, we live in this cloud of cloverleaf happiness a lot of times. I think sometimes we're sheltered in that way, but I love living in the cloud of green of cloverleaf. I think it's really brought the best out of us. And Clifton Strengths is a great way to do that within your organization as well. Let me go back. Here we go. Okay, so Melanie's going to take it from here and dive a little bit deeper into just using Cloverleaf and with Clifton Strengths, and a little bit more into the themes of Clifton Strengths and things like that.
Yeah, so thanks, Heidi. I appreciate that. Couple of things to keep in mind at the outset, right? So when we think about key drivers of employee engagement, and depending on which research you're looking at, on any given day, right? We know that we have an employee engagement problem. And a lot of organizations are really working hard to figure out sort of that perfect formula to keep employees engaged. And so what Gallup research tells us is that there are some key drivers to engagement that matter on a regular basis. One, we all want to do work that feels meaningful, right? So we want to feel like we're tied to a purpose. Again, usually a purpose that is bigger than ourselves. We want to feel like we are contributors to that. But we also want to feel like we have opportunities to grow and to develop. And we also want to be surrounded by folks who seemingly care about us, not only the work that we do, but care about us as a human, as an individual. And then also the ability to have meaningful conversations, right, on a regular basis about not only the work that we're doing today, but what does that look like for us moving forward, right? What does that growth path look like? And the trick to that is if we can keep it focused on ways that we can contribute in meaningful ways based on the strengths that we bring to the table, we tend to be more engaged than if those things are not present. So real quickly, I'm just going to throw out a question and type into the chat. Research tells us that in general, most folks in most organizations in any given day don't necessarily believe that they're having meaningful conversations, so meaningful one-on-one conversations with their leader or their manager on a real regular basis. So if you were to guess, what percentage of the population has said that they've had a really meaningful conversation with their manager in the last week? What percentage of people would you believe? Okay, 10, 20, 25, 25, 9, 65, 5. Okay, got a 25. Any other guesses? 5, 10. Okay, so the trend that I see here is that in large part, many of you feel like the percentage of time or the percentage of conversations that are meaningful, right? The percentage of meaningful conversations we've had with the manager in the last week is relatively low, right? So if you believe the research, the research indicates that percentage is actually 16%. So 16% of the working population would say that they had a very meaningful conversation with a team lead or supervisor in the last week. So when you think about that and you think about what Clifton Strengths gives you an opportunity to do, both as an individual and if you are a leader of a team, the thing that it allows you to do is explore what you bring to the table, right? So Heidi and I both have similar roles in that we are customer success managers, but our strength profiles are entirely different. And so what that means is we bring a different set of talents. So even though the role might be same, we bring a different set of talents to the table. So if you are an individual sitting in on this call and you have a Cloverleaf profile and you have taken the CliftonStrengths, the one thing that I would encourage you to go out there and do is look at those top 5 and really understand what value do you bring to the table based on those things that you are naturally wired to do. And Heidi mentioned, that those things are things you're naturally wired for. So in my experience, you know that somebody's naturally wired to do it because they can't not do it. They do it at work, they do it at home, they do it when they're with family and friends, they do it when they're with colleagues. And so that's how a sure indicator, right, that something is a true strength. And so Heidi, if you can go to that next slide for me. One of the things that you'll also, that it's also important to note with the CliftonStrengths is in addition to each of the individual strengths, all of those strengths funnel into a specific theme. So there are 4 themes across CliftonStrengths, and those themes really involve how people get things done, right? So there's the executing theme, and the executing theme really involves how do you make things happen, right? How do you bring things to life? The strengths that fall into the influencing category are really about ways that you naturally influence others. The relationship building theme really is around what are your strengths and how do you naturally tend to build relationships with others? And then the strategic thinking theme includes all of those different strengths that involve how you think and analyze and absorb information. And so when you think about this from a work perspective, right? And you think about us all being wired differently, right? So we use our time, we make our decisions, we manage our emotions differently, we manage our stress differently. All of that leads to us communicating differently. And so at the end of the day, when you think about this from from a team perspective in Cloverleaf, it really becomes a matter of trying to understand who am I, who are you, and what should we keep in mind, right, about one another as we engage in our day-to-day activities, right? Because if you can understand where I'm coming from and you can if I can understand where you're coming from, you can understand where I'm coming from, chances are we are going to be a little more flexible with one another, right? So rather than Heidi thinking, oh, I know Melanie does that just to drive me bananas, right? She'd be able to come out, take a look at my strengths, and she can see maybe where I'm leaning in. And again, just gives sort of a different perspective of how folks may be wired similarly or different than ourselves. So if we can go on to the next. This next slide here, this is an example of the kind of data that you would see inside of Cloverleaf, inside of the CliftonStrengths module, inside of Cloverleaf, if you took that assessment and you have your results populating inside of Cloverleaf. So if you don't hear anything else that we talk about today, the one thing I would encourage you to keep in mind and something to experiment with is using this information to begin to have more meaningful conversations inside of your organization, whether that's with a peer, whether that's with a manager, a team lead, whatever the case may be. But we can do better than 16%, right? Is the percentage of folks having meaningful conversations in their work days. So an example of that might be, I'm going to give you a couple of conversation starters. So and I want you to think about this not only for yourself, if you were looking at your own strengths, but also think about this if you're talking with teammates, right? And some of those things might be taking a look at all of your strengths, and really thinking about how those themes might complement one another. Okay. And I'll give you an example for me. So I have learner, achiever, arranger, and one that's just off the screen here that you can't see is input. So I have a love of learning, right? I've also the achiever, so I have stamina in there. Arranger, so I really love complexity. I like to move things around. But one of the other strengths that I have is input, right? So I love to collect things. And in my case, I love to collect information, and that often shows up in my love for collecting books, which you might also see. So when you talk about how you uniquely bring your strengths to bear in a given role, if anyone is on the call here and has spent any amount of time with me, I can promise you I have probably given you a book recommendation. If you gave me a subject that you were interested in at some point in time, I probably gave you a book that I read that is sort of ancillary to that, or that I think that you might enjoy. So again, when you think about how to use this data in real life, in real applicable ways on a day-to-day basis, really think about how do those themes combine to maybe complement one another? And then how does it affect how you approach your role, right? So think about that. And then also, how does it impact, how might it impact the way that you build relationships, right? So input being one of my top strengths, one of the inputs is collecting things. And the way that I build relationships is by sharing information based on what people tell me they need, right? So, again, just an example, and I'll turn to Heidi or Jason. Do either of you have an example of those things that you would want to share? And I realize I'm putting you on the spot, but if you do, I'd love to hear.
You're muted.
Oh,
Sorry,
one
I
of
thought you.
oh, sorry. Did you want to talk, Heidi?
No, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. One of mine I often think about is I have the futuristic or yeah, futuristic strength. So futurists are inspired by their dreams of the future and what could be. These dreamers often inspire others with their visions of the future. So that's one of my top five, and I am reminded of that with pretty much every collaborative project that we do. Immediately when a new feature is rolled out, I'm always thinking about how this is going to impact our users, or what the potential um, questions might come up with a certain feature, and trying to get a step ahead of that. Um, that comes from, I guess, through being an educator in a previous life, mix that in with being a parent too. You always got to stay a couple steps ahead. And I think that just naturally just came to me. And as plans develop for, or a demo is released, I'm always thinking about how would our customers, what kind of questions would they ask around this? Is this easy for them to use? And just always going to the future of a project or a product or something like that. So that's where I naturally kind of gravitate towards.
I love that. I love that. The other thing that I would point out here is while the strengths certainly are what you bring to the table, it's sort of your individual stamp, the way that you get things done. The other thing to keep in mind, especially as it relates to having meaningful conversations, taken to the extreme, right? Sometimes a strength can also be a bit of a hindrance, right? So I would encourage you to think about that. And I would also encourage you, as it relates to meaningful conversations and as it relates, to these strengths, I would really encourage you to find someone inside of the organization, whether that's a manager, whether that's a peer, to have that sort of conversation with, and use what you're learning in Cloverleaf to see how that resonates, right? How that resonates with you, and ask others about how that might show up for them, right? How that might show up on the team, and use that as a conversation starter in that way. And then the next thing that I want to talk about is how we can use what we learn in CliftonStrengths as it relates to understanding team strengths. So if you are using it to have the more meaningful conversations individually, how can you use what you're learning on CliftonStrengths to understand the strengths of an entire team a little bit better? And so here what you're looking at, this is actually an example of our customer team here at Cloverleaf. And so if you are utilizing CliftonStrengths inside of Cloverleaf, one of the things that you will see, and if you look on the far left, you have that team themes. So it will tell you what the primary theme for a given group of individuals inside of Cloverleaf is. So for instance, in our customer team, our primary dominant theme is relationship building, right? So makes sense, right? Yeah, our end goal is to serve our clients. Relationship building is our top theme. Next in line, shortly behind that, our influencing theme, right? So those strengths related to how you influence others. We have strategic thinking, and then our executing. And if you look at our distribution across the team, that's that middle chart, right? And so here, this is really helpful to think about as you think about a team and as you think about gifts and gaps, right? So there's a lot of times when, you know, maybe a team is perfectly, we have distribution, we have, you know, sort of people in each of those themes, right? And we're perfectly distributed in that way. But other times we may not be as perfectly balanced, right? And that's completely, you know, normal. A lot of times people will come to me and they'll be like, oh my goodness, Melanie, you know, we're missing something. If we're looking at our dashboard, is it okay that we don't have anybody in, you know, in this theme over here? And the truth of the matter is you are all competent, capable adults. So it doesn't mean that that's not going, or that that's going undone. What probably means is you have people leaning into areas and activities that they might not be naturally wired to do. And it might actually not be, they might not be deriving energy from it. So why do you care about that, right? So, well, if you think about what we talked about earlier around engagement, and you think about if you are participating in, you know, activities and you don't have an opportunity to use your strengths, that is the surest path to burnout. Because you're doing something that's not bringing you energy, right? And so when you think about that, another way to look at that inside of Cloverleaf on the team dashboard is the team roles grid. So when you log into Cloverleaf and you look at the team roles grid, what you'll see there are a handful of roles. Now, what that's based on is research that tells us in any given team, right? Any given high performing team, we know that there are a handful of roles to be played, right? So there are innovators, right? Those who are naturally wired to bring new ideas to the table. Resourcers, right? People who are good at going outside of the department or outside of the organization and bringing, whether that's new ideas, new contacts in. We've got coordinators who are great at making sure we've got the right people in the right places, the right information at the right time. We've got our drivers who are really great at keeping us with forward momentum, right? Hitting those milestones, doing things on time. Our monitors help us, you know, stay on track, make sure that we're mitigating risk every chance we get. The teammate category, those are folks who make sure that there's space around around the table for, you know, everyone on the team. And the reason I point this out is because the team roles grid works hand in hand with a variety of assessments. And what that team roles grid can help you understand is, again, in leveraging the team's strengths. So when you think about how strengths might be tied to given roles on a team, right? What that does is it lets you know how folks are sort of naturally wired. So on the team roles grid, next to each avatar, you'll notice there are 3 dots, and um, those 3 dots are indicative of sort of how folks are naturally wired and the level of energy that they might derive from that, right? So the more dots that are filled, the higher, sort of the more naturally they're wired to lean into that, probably derive energy from it. The fewer the dots, still might be able to lean into it perfectly fine, but might not derive as much energy from it. And so therefore, might not want to do that. It might be something they can lean into periodically, but not maybe perhaps not a role you would want to do 40 hours, 40 hours a week. And so I point that out to say, because a lot of times when folks say, "Oh, Melanie, we have a gap here, or we have a gap there. What does that mean?" And I'll tell you from a practical standpoint, what that means is, typically you'll need to create a process to make sure that you are utilizing the team's strengths in the best way possible. Here's a perfect example. Let's say that you have a whole lot of folks who have strengths that equate to that innovator category, right? And let's say you have very few that equate to the driver category. What that can lead to is a whole lot of brainstorming sessions where decisions don't get made and we don't move things forward. So the process, when I talk about adding process to that, an example of that might be, we're gonna have one meeting, we're gonna meet for 90 minutes, and the next meeting, we're gonna come together to decide, right? And so that way everybody involved is clear that, again, sort of what the parameters are on that. So I share all of that to say there is no wrong or right, there is no better or best, and there is no one result that is more indicative of success or failure than any other. The idea behind it is simply, understanding how we're wired, understanding what we bring to the table, and then also being able to understand the same in our teammates, right? And how do we work best? Who am I, who are you, and how should we engage given what we know to be true about the two of us? And so again, just some real practical ways to think about using CliftonStrengths and utilizing your team dashboard on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to pause there and look to Heidi and Jason. Any questions that came up throughout that?
Yeah. I'm responding to one. They were asking for a little bit more information on the research beyond about team roles. So I'm going to insert a help doc that discuss a little bit more about our team roles feature and a little bit more about the team roles in general. If you all would like to check that out, that is in the chat.
Perfect. Yep, and that was everything that we had to share. Certainly want to turn it over for any questions, any discussion from folks in the audience.
I think to add to that, I'll also throw in our just general research page in case anybody wants to check that out as well. We have a uh, very intelligent chief research officer who pours a lot of hours into the science behind all of this. So here's a link to our research page as well.
You all are still seeing my screen. I was just going to jump into the platform a little bit more while we have some time and show you a little bit more of just CliftonStrengths and looking into that. So we discussed a little bit, all of this, you can drill in and see that. If you're looking to see other folks' profiles, you can find them there. What we didn't mention either is I really like this feature to know a list of your team's strengths, and then it shows who has that strength. I actually lean on this a lot when I'm struggling with something that I'm not naturally wired to do. And I go, what is that I'm missing that I feel like would be helpful, sometimes I'll jump into this and look and go, oh, you know, it would be super helpful if I had this strength and who has it. And then I'll go in and find somebody and just pick their brain. Um, the inactive strengths, what's super helpful to know is obviously it's just to know where the gaps are. And Melanie had mentioned where some of those gaps and things were, to know that we're all capable, like she said, we're all capable, we're adults, we can do all of these things. It's just not something that we're wired to do. So if there is a project that maybe isn't going the way that we expected it to go, or it's maybe falling flat in a certain area or something like that, sometimes what I've done in the past is gone, where did that go wrong? Oh, could be because we don't have any strength. Something to keep in mind for the next time that we do something, is we're missing some of these. Just something to keep in mind. Doesn't mean I have to go out and create this strength. It just means that, hey, we're not as adaptable as maybe some other teams are. So we just maybe need to put more time into a project, because if something shifts, we need to know that we need the time to shift our project, and because we're not able to just adapt to the whim. So just certain things like that can be super helpful to know if you're missing a strength on your team, or who has those strengths, and where you can lean on different teammates for the things that you might be missing.
And I did see there was a question in the chat regarding maybe how often you would recommend individuals revisiting their strengths to see where they may have grown in a particular area. And I will tell you from Gallup's perspective, so for purposes of Cloverleaf, we include, we give you the opportunity to include your top five strengths. Gallup's position tends to be that while your top 10 positions might, like your seventh strength might, sometimes fall down to your eighth, or maybe sometimes it'll bump up to, your fifth. Gallup firmly believes that your top 10 remain relatively stable over the course of your life. So again, it's not that you can't grow in those strengths, but they believe that sort of innately, the way that you are wired, that the top 10 remain relatively consistent over time.
Yeah. And I'd say too, for me personally, mine have shifted. My, I think I took CliftonStrengths back in 2018, and I took it more recently, just as we had this partnership with Gallup. I'm like, man, it's been a while, I'm just curious. Retook it, same strengths, just in a different order. Wasn't super surprised. They did totally shift in order, which was really interesting, but same strengths were listed. I think one fell off and like one was popped up, but all of that was the same. In years prior, I had had a pretty big change in my job, and I jokingly was telling everyone, "Oh my gosh, this project has changed me." And I kind of laughed about it, but I could tell there was a difference in just me as a person. And I had taken CliftonStrengths earlier in my career, and then took it right after that project was done, and completely changed my top five. Like none of them were the same. So we didn't take the top 10, so I can't speak to that. There quite possibly could have been there. But if there is something major that's happened in your life, it could shift some things. Doesn't mean that like, oh, I had a project at work and it changed. That was a very big outlier, I will say. That I don't think that happens to everyone. But if there's a big life change, like you moved, or you were married, or you had kids, or something that's completely shifted your life, you can always retake it. You may see some of those shifts, but like Melanie said, it could just be a shift of order more than anything.
Yeah, and I would say there are other assessments that tend to change more over time based on your worldview changing, right? So, Enneagram might be an example of, certain aspects of that your worldview might change. Or if you're in like a real traumatic time of stress and you take an assessment in that way, and then you take it, much later, like those, in that case, you might see some different changes. DISC, which is predominantly, used in a professional setting and environment. Again, I have seen those results, so if I were to look at my results of a DISC when I was 20 versus, where I sit today, those results are different, but it's a largely reflection of, again, sort of how I've changed professionally over time based on the roles and responsibility in my career. Okay.
Yeah. So as far as a recommendation on how often to take it, I mean, I don't know that they're like, you should take it every couple of years. It really just depends on you as the individual. Um, you know, is it good to reset every once in a while? Sure, but I wouldn't do it every year. I wouldn't even do it every 5 years. I would say, if you took it when you first started in your career and you're just curious because it's been 20 years later, I'd say go for it. It can't hurt anything. But I don't think like living your truth under the assumption that you have these strengths and then, oh my gosh, I retook it and it totally changed. Chances are, if you really still feel that strength, it's still a strength. It may have shifted in the number or something like that, but I was really shocked to see. I didn't even know when I first was introduced to Clifton Strengths. I was like, "What is woo? What is this? Is weird." Now that I know what that is, I'm like, "Oh yeah," and that has been in there my entire life. It may have been, lower on the rung, and now it's higher, but and it may go back down later, but it's always going to be there. Some of those strong, and any of these assessments, some of these strong characteristics. I'm never going to be an introvert. I'm so sorry. I'm just not. I am an extrovert through and through. And so I'm 100% when it comes to that. And so there's not going to be a shift in that where I may be a little more, I have a little more space to grow, or things where I'm not as strong in. So these strengths, any of these assessments, um, by all means, the nice thing about Cloverleaf is you can retake a lot of these assessments anytime you want, but I wouldn't say you'd need to take them every 5 minutes or anything like that. Something we will mention too, while we're on here, Clifton Strengths is an extra charge. It is not always included in your plan packages. We have shifted some of our plans with our enterprises and our businesses to include it in our packages. So if you want more information on that, just let us, one of your customer success manager or your account executive know, and we can talk a little bit more about that. So if you aren't seeing it, or if you'd like to take it and it's like popping up a charge, it is an extra cost on a lot of the plans. So it's just something to keep in mind. I think to take the top 5 just on Gallup's website, it's $20. So we're not talking something super, and incredible, but it is an extra cost for a lot of the folks that are on the system currently. And like I said, we've got this partnership now, so we're working with some things that can help with that. And if you're interested in wanting to know more, just let us know.
Yeah, and Heidi, there was a question in regards to where folks can enter their Clifton Strengths if they already have them.
Yeah, I will jump on while I've got my thing here. So when you are in here, mine are already in here, so that's why you're seeing this. But if you haven't taken it at all, it will have a box that says I know my strengths. Or if you've taken it again and you want to re-enter them, you'll just go in and edit your scores, and then you'll just select your strengths in here and save. So if you have taken the assessment before and you just want to enter in your strengths, that is totally fine and completely free.